Hi, my name is Isa, and today I will be sharing helpful tips for those occupied in the field of professional communications. More specifically, I will be talking about how to connect with your audience, especially in live presentations. So, some things that I will cover are understanding your audience. Like, what should you know about them? This can help you figure out how to best deliver your content and what your content should even include. How to engage with your audience. Maybe the use of visual aids and interactive games can help pull your audience in. And lastly, what to avoid, because the last thing you want is to have your audience dozing off. So, let's get started. So, the importance of understanding your audience. First of all, what is an audience and when do you have them? Well, an audience is a group of people that are watching or reading, observing, listening to something. So, television programs, theater performances, authors, even live speakers, they all have audiences. And in the world of professional communications, audiences are quite important. They are whom the information is being targeted at, and they are the ones that are ultimately listening to the message that's trying to be conveyed. That's why it's important to understand your audience, because knowing your audience can help you determine the best way of getting your message across, which can make your presentation more successful. So, for instance, should you use a certain tone when speaking? Should your presentation include visual aids? Stuff like this. Understanding your audience becomes easier when you know a little bit about them. For instance, what do they care about? What do they need to hear? What do they want to know? This can help you find an angle that will allow you to better connect with your audience, because knowing your audience demographic can help you find similarities that you share with the audience or that the audience shares with each other. So let's say your audience members have something in common with one another. Using that commonality makes for a potential angle of approach. So, other than having a general idea of the demographics of your audience, how else can you better understand them? Well, you can actually do research in advance. This can be done through online surveys or questionnaires. Researching your audience will allow you to see what your audience knows and doesn't know about your topic. This kind of information can help you determine the content of your presentation. Another way to understand them is by personally getting to know them. So let's say you were a live speaker. Maybe you would greet your audience members at the door prior to your presentation. This would establish that short but sweet connection to the people who will be listening to your message. Your audience members will likely be more engaged in your presentation after you've personally greeted them. And lastly, you can use the call and response technique. An example of this in a live presentation would be the speaker giving a call, which can be in the form of a question or a statement, and then that call is then completed by the response, usually given by the audience. This makes your presentation interactive, which makes for an effective way of engaging your audience. Keeping your audience engaged is important because you don't want to bore them. The last thing you want is to be a talking head with an audience who isn't even on the same page as you. One way of keeping your audience engaged is through traditional speaker-audience interaction. This is similar to the call and response technique mentioned in the previous slide. Asking questions and allowing your presentation to become an experience for your listeners increases audience engagement and satisfaction. Another way of keeping your audience engaged is by using the storytelling method. This can be an effective way of capturing your audience members because storytelling is entertaining and attention-grabbing, and some stories can even be relatable. Not to mention the use of visual aids such as photos and videos, slide presentations, and even props can keep your audience engaged. However, the use of visual aids is to be kept at a limit because sometimes too many distractions can deter your audience away from your words and your speech. Polls and games such as Kahoot, they're a great way to increase audience engagement because they can encourage your audience to not only think about your questions and what you are telling them, but for them to think about their answers and what they already know about your topic. The results of the polls can also create additional discussion points. Another effective way of engaging your audience is through humor, when appropriate, of course. A good speaker will occasionally use humor and natural charisma to convey their points and get their audience excited about what they're saying. Body language also keeps your audience engaged, but too much can also act as a distraction. Speaking with your hands and moving them in a thoughtful way that enhances your presentation can really draw your audience in. Okay, so we've discussed some of the many things you can do to really engage your audience when giving a live presentation. But what should we avoid doing? Well, we definitely shouldn't use pretentious language. We need to remember that when we're speaking in front of an audience, we aren't trying to impress them. We're trying to communicate to them and get our message across. Using pretentious language will only make that harder. Our goal is to speak in a way that's easy to hear and understand and comprehend. Jargon. Well, that goes for the same as jargon as well. And plus, the use of jargon tends to exclude a lot of people and prevent a lot of people from really understanding what's being said. So if you want to connect with your audience, definitely refrain from using this. Another thing to avoid when giving speeches, especially in front of a large audience, is taking too long to get to the point. We can all think of countless times when we were bored to sleep in incidences where someone was speaking and the lights were a little too dim. Just kidding. You definitely don't want to be on the other side of that situation, speaking to a whole bunch of half-asleep people as your audience. So going to use an opener, keep it short but sweet, and get to your point. Not staying on task during your speech and going off topic will only confuse your audience, and confusion will eventually cause them to stop listening. You will get the same outcome with unpreparedness and inorganization. Presentation is key in a presentation. So if you show up in very casual clothes with an audience wearing something like business formal, this may cause a little barrier between you guys, which will make communication and connection between you and your audience harder to achieve. So act like you are worth your audience's time. Poor delivery. Okay, so this is sort of hard for some speakers, me especially, but poor delivery can definitely create a barrier between you and your audience as well, a communication barrier. You want your words to be clear and understandable so your audience can really get the point of your speech. Speak slowly to avoid stuttering and to avoid having your audience struggling to keep up with you. Lastly, eye contact. This may seem difficult to do when you have an audience of quite a few people, but holding eye contact with members of your audience for 2 to 3 seconds at a time can really establish that unspoken connection. This is hard. Maybe try having your point of view be between people's heads or the wall behind your audience to keep your eyes gazing forward. Alright, before we wrap up, just some things to keep in mind in order to really communicate with your audience, especially for those with jobs in professional communications. Number 1, your goal is to get your message across. Remember, you are not trying to impress your audience. They are there to absorb what you are trying to tell them. So tell them in a way that they will understand you. 2, don't be a talking head. Really be thoughtful about what you're trying to say. Can you send your message with fewer words? Can you simplify your main points? Would you benefit from a shorter introduction? Really think about these important speech components before presenting. 3, just be thoughtful in general. Use thoughtful hand gestures. Use media like pie charts and graphs and other visual aids to enhance your presentation. Get your audience involved and interact with them. And don't forget to use humor. Have your presentation be entertaining so you don't lose your audience, because if you lose them, you really won't be able to properly communicate your message and really get that point across. And lastly, practice, because practice makes perfect. By reciting your speech over and over again, you get to polish your presentation and see what it's missing. You begin to catch those little things that could be removed or improved. And you just overall become more confident with your delivery because you've reiterated it for so long. You want to present it at the point where the information you're trying to share is natural to you and feels more than just memorization. And maybe grab a sip of water and use the bathroom before you start your presentation. Thank you for watching my presentation on how to better communicate with your audience and what to avoid when presenting. Good luck!